Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of A Chat in the Square, a new series by the Square Mediterranean Center for Revolutionary Studies. Today, our first topic will be women's rights in Morocco, and we are going to speak about it with Lorena Stella Martini, our research fellow that did a lot of extensive research on this topic. Thank you, Lorena.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here.
And I think we can go straight to the point, Lorena. You did extensive research on the topic in Morocco. And I would like to ask you, how would you describe the scene of feminism, for example, in Morocco?
Thank you, Jacopo. So in Morocco, the fight for women's rights started in an episodic way, we could say, before the independence. Nevertheless, the first independent and structured secular feminist organizations, which were formally autonomous from the parties, were created throughout the 80s, and they had the aim of pursuing women's emancipation and women's rights. Those associations mainly followed the mainstream concept of gender equality, which throughout the 90s, as we all know, acquired an increasing relevance at an international level. So those feminist secular associations contributed to the progress of women's condition in Morocco, but I think it is really important to stress, to mention that their narrative is far from being undisputed, from being the only one in the country. Indeed, as it was demonstrated, for example, by the process of reform of the Mudawana, the Moroccan Family Code, which was finalized in 2004, the concept of gender equality, which in Arabic is translated as musawa, is opposed. It was opposed throughout this process, which lasted some years of activism, of demonstration, of lobbying for the approbation of this new family code. So the concept of musawa was opposed to the one of takamul, which is the complementarity between men and women, a very gendered vision supported by Islamist parties and associations. Then on the other hand, we also have a so-called third way, if I may, in Morocco as elsewhere in the Islamic world, which is represented by Islamic feminism. Islamic feminism is centered on the attempt to reread Islamic holy sources through the lenses of gender equality. So to answer your question, Jacopo, I would say that the scene of feminism in Morocco is rich, is a multidimensional panorama, which is far from being monolithic. So it's a really rich scenario.
Okay. Well, so if I get it right, you were talking about developments concerning women's condition in Morocco, but they were sparked by secular feminist association, right?
Yes, I mean, those associations were able to win some important battles, especially from the legal point of view, which is the one on which I would focus today. Among those progresses, those developments, we find, for example, the introduction of the equality of men and women within the marriage contract, or the regulation of polygyny, even if not the abolition, because polygyny is still legal today in Morocco, the regulation of divorce. So those were all measures introduced in the 2004 reform of the Mudawana. The possibility for Moroccan women married with foreigners to pass down the nationality, the Moroccan nationality, to their children, or in 2011, the introduction of gender equality in the new constitutional reform, or again, 3 years ago in 2018, a new law addressing violence against women. So I would say those progresses were important for women's condition in Morocco. Of course, they were pushed by those secular feminist associations I was talking about before. But there are some considerations to be made on those points. The first considerations I would make is that these associations calling for women's rights managed to make some conquests, mainly thanks to the modus operandi that they adopted. Indeed, between the 20th and the 21st century, also with the renewal of Moroccan monarchy and the new king, Mohammed As-Sadis, Mohammed VI, those associations took advantage of a sort of pluralization of power relations, which were orchestrated by the monarchy, and they dropped conflictual relations with the power system to enter into a phase of negotiation, mediation with the power. So they started cooperating with the institutions, for example, working as consultants. They operated through actions of lobbying. So in one word, or in short, I would say they started working from within the system. And it is from within the system that they had an impact in the national context, and they promoted those reforms. But of course, they also had to accept many compromises, and this same modus operandi defined the borders of their activism. Of course, this modality of acting, this contentious modality, if we can call them like that, created some tensions within the contentious panorama in Morocco. And this is something that we saw, for example, within the 20 February movement. Indeed, those some of those feminist associations I was talking about before, at the beginning supported the 20 February movement, but then they started cooperating with the monarchy with the beginning of the constitutional reform. And for this reason, they were accused by the activists of the 20 February movement of coalescing with power in order to reach their goal, that was the recognition of the gender equality in the constitution, that in the end was recognized in the new Article 19 of the Moroccan constitution. But doing so, according to the activists of the 20 February movement, they did not consider the bigger picture and the need to spark a real democratic process where gender equality could really be put into practice. And this is, I think, a main point, because the problem with the legal reforms concerning women's rights in Morocco throughout the last decades is that, and I mean, always, because we're talking about this period, is that in many cases, they stayed only on paper without actually initiating a social, overall cultural change that could make them really effective. Of course, I don't want to be tranchant. I mean, there are many actors that are fighting also for these really changes to be made. Many grassroots organizations that have entered the scene more recently, which have adopted different contentious styles with different tools, but also at different levels, those same feminist associations, secular feminist associations I was dealing with, they also work to make changes on the ground, even if in the framework of the modus operandi I try to explain.
I see. But
it's a difficult topic.
I understand, but maybe, I mean, my question is, maybe it's one million euro question, but what remains to be done in Morocco? I mean, which are the issues where the condition of women still needs to be improved in Moroccan society and the system?
Okay, so yeah, this is an important and a difficult question to answer, because of course in Morocco, as in many other countries, as in Italy, as in the whole world, there are many issues that still need to be tackled from the point of view of both the law and on the ground, to make a link with what I was saying before. I think that I won't say anything new if I hint at underage marriage as a real social plague. I would say Morocco, indeed, the Modawana reform of 2004 stated the legal age for marriage to be 18 years old for both husband and wife. But within this same law, there is still a place for exceptions, because requests to register marriage before the age of 18 can be presented to courts, and it is up to the judge to accept or to dismiss them. And what we know is that most requests are presented by fathers or by male tutors who are willing to marry off their female children before the age of 18. So this is a problem. Because there is a legal shortcut that allow them to do so. But other than these shortcuts, there is also another phenomenon which is common in Morocco, and it is called zawaj urfigi, so the customary marriage, or the marriage by fatiha. This means that the marriage by fatiha is not legally registered, but it is made valid, culturally, customarily valid, by the reading of the fatiha, so the first surah of the Quran. And those cases are very common for underage marriage, because they sort of skip the passage of legal registration, which is not always allowed in the case of underage marriages. But this kind of zawaj is also extremely well spread among adults, especially in the rural and in the poorer areas. The problem is that the wife and the children resulting, if I may, from that marriage do not have any right, they cannot make any legal claim if the husband decides to leave the wedlock. And so it is really easy for him to do so and to leave the wife and the children alone in a position of marginalization. And I think this is a situation which shows how difficult it still is for a woman in Morocco to claim her rights outside the legal bond of marriage. And it is paradoxical because even the institution of marriage itself is far from being a real guarantee for women's rights, because much still needs to be done to improve the institution of marriage. Another issue, I think, which still needs to be tackled is the huge gender gap in the job market. Indeed, according to some statistics I was reading yesterday, only 21%, sorry, of women in the labor force participation are women. Yeah, I mean, only 21% of the labor force is female. And these are statistics from the World Bank, so it can be more or less precise, but it gives us an idea of things on the ground, even if, of course, we are dealing with formal work, not with informal one, but still. Other pending problems, a really common problem is gender violence, a phenomenon which should have been targeted by the 2018 law I was mentioning before, but which was not. The law does not target it completely, and the practice is still extremely common, both at a social and familial level. And it is often linked to a patriarchal conception of women's bodies. And this same patriarchal conception is also reflected on the prejudice and the social and legal limitation which are linked to the sphere of women's sexuality, which is a sphere that is extremely targeted by prejudice, as I was saying, and it is also object of legal provisions, legal measures. And this is, I think, really peculiar of the Moroccan case.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite an interesting point. I mean, you mentioned the patriarchal vision and sphere of women's sexuality, and I mean, in this sense, there are some claims for more rights. I mean, concerning the domain of sexuality in Morocco. I mean, please, if you can develop.
Yes, there are, especially in the last decades. We have witnessed the many protests, many claims which were different, still are differently linked with women's bodies and women's sexuality from the point of view of, for example, sexual violence, so the fight against sexual violence, the call for more individual freedoms, the problem of abortion, which is still criminalized in Morocco, so it represents a legal offense, both from the side of the woman who gets the abortion and from the side of the doctors that operates it. So there would be much to say in this point, but not to talk too much. I think that I would focus on two recent and meaningful initiatives I was following. One is a campaign organized by Mali. Mali is the Mouvement Alternatif pour les Libertés Individuelles. It is a really interesting movement to follow in Morocco. It is active in the call for individual freedoms since 2009, so more than a decade. And it started with a demonstrative action where the two founders, two women, broke the fast during Ramadan to protest against the violation of individual freedoms in Morocco, where breaking the fast during Ramadan is a criminal offense. So it is included in the penal code. And it's also a movement really active to fight against the decriminalization of abortion, against the criminalization of homosexuality. And Mali has recently organized a campaign to raise awareness on the patriarchal myth of female virginity and its serious consequences on women from the point of view of their well-being, both on the physical and the psychological level. Indeed, there are many instances of violence against women who are deemed not to be virgin during their first night of marriage. But the problem is the conception at the beginning, because as this campaign wants to show, there is no real way to understand if a woman is a virgin, and of course controlling that there is blood or not on the sheets after the first night of marriage is not a scientific way to prove that a woman is virgin or not. But the problem is that this proof is used by many families to commit violence against the wife, the bride, or also to try to break the marriage. It is something that poses many problems for women in Morocco as elsewhere, and this is why I think this campaign is really important. And another point I would like to raise is about the activities of another movement, le Mouvement Hors la Loi, so the so-called Moroccan outlaws. They have three different names, one in French, one in English, and then there is Kharij al-Qanun, which is outlaws in Arabic. So this, so they are really, professional for what concerns language, and not only. So they started as a collective in September 2019, so as a really small reality. And then they use the combination of more traditional tools, contentious tools, and digital new ones to fight against the abolition, to fight for, the abolition of all those measures that are against individual freedoms in the Moroccan penal code. There are many measures against individual freedoms, such as, for example, the Article 490, upon which the movement itself is named. That is the article that criminalizes sexual relationships outside the wedlock, or the Article 489 that criminalizes homosexuality, and many others. So on this, so there is one fight to change the law, but on the other side, what is interesting is that there is also another side of the struggle, which is the one to raise awareness and to break the taboos concerning sexuality in Morocco. So I think that those two initiatives, which come from very different movements, which have a distinct way to move within Moroccan contentious panorama, this is of course important to state, but both initiatives are animated, from what I understand, from what I see, by a common will to raise awareness on the serious social and also political consequences of violating and limiting women's freedoms, also in the domain of sexuality. So to answer your question, yeah, there are claims and there are battles, there are struggles to try to advance the condition of women also in the domain of sexuality, which is extremely linked to the condition of women at 360 degrees.
I mean, yeah, I'm understanding there is a long path ahead for gender equality and women's rights in Morocco.
Yeah, but we have hope. Really,
yeah, there is a struggle on the topic
yes,
by several groups. Well, thank you for your explanation. I hope also
thank you for having me.
Enjoyed it, and this was the first chat in the square, but there will be following chats with several experts on very different topic in the future. So stay tuned with the square, and goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.